while walking into school. My best friend stopped me and said, "Turn the other way or it's your funeral." "Stop messing with me," I laughed, trying to push past him. His hand gripped my shoulder hard. "If you're not gone within 5 minutes, I can't promise you'll be safe." The smile died on my face. "What are you doing, man?" "Don't try to stop me." His voice cracked. "You're one of the good ones, Josh. Go be with your family." That's when I noticed how carefully he was holding his backpack. He was hiding something inside it. My stomach dropped. Gustav had been weird lately, obsessed with some online forums I didn't understand, talking about making statements. "Gustav, whatever's in that bag," I didn't finish. I tackled him hard, both of us hitting the concrete. His backpack went flying, but he scrambled after it desperately, wrapping his arms around it. "Whatever you think you're doing, it's not worth it." I had him pinned, my knee on his chest. "Please, man. Think about your mom. Think about what happens after. You'll destroy lives." His fist connected with my throat. Pain exploded through my windpipe and I rolled off him, gasping. I couldn't breathe or talk. Black spots dancing in my vision. Gustav stood up, adjusting his backpack. The parking lot was filling with students now. Normal Tuesday morning, everyone oblivious. "I'm sorry, Josh, but this has to happen today. Today's the anniversary." "Anniversary of what?" I forced words through my crushed throat. "I'll call the police." He turned back, his face cold. "Fine. Call them. Whoever you tell, I'll deal with them too." "What's going on, boys?" Mrs. E. Patterson waddled out of the building, 7 months pregnant, her favorite coffee mug in hand. Our AP biology teacher, the one who'd written Gustav's college recommendation letter last month. "Why are you crying, Josh?" She looked between us with concern. "Did you boys have a fight?" I was crying. I hadn't realized. Gustav stared at me. "Your choice, bud," he said quietly. "Tell her and she's getting bit." "Nothing," I choked out. "We're just going to class." Mrs. V. Patterson smiled. "Well, I'll walk you both in. Make sure you get there safe." She winked. "Can't have my best students playing hooky." Gustav's jaw clenched. As she turned to lead us inside, he leaned close to me. His breath smelled like energy drinks and fear. If she doesn't leave us alone in 10 seconds, I swear to God I'm doing it right here. In front of her. In front of everyone. His backpack had shifted during our fight. The zipper was partially open and I could see inside. Metal. Long and dark. Something coiled. My heart stopped. We walked through the main hallway. Mrs. Patterson chatting about the upcoming science fair, completely unaware. The hall was packed. Freshman lockers slamming. Couples kissing goodbye. The normal chaos that would become anything but normal if Gustav did whatever he was planning. "Speaking of projects," Mrs. Patterson said, "I never got your proposal, Gustav. The one about invasive species?" "You'll see it today," Gustav said. His voice was mechanical. "Everyone will see it." I spotted Officer Davis by the cafeteria and caught his eye, frantically gesturing behind Mrs. Patterson's back, pointing at Gustav, at the backpack, mouthing help. He started walking toward us, hand already on his radio. "Actually," Gustav said louder, "why wait? Mrs. Patterson, you should know. You taught us about ecosystem disruption, about how one species can destroy everything." He was reaching for his zipper. More security was coming. 3 officers now. They'd noticed my panic, Gustav's behavior. This was it. My only chance. I grabbed Gustav's backpack, ripping it fully open. "I have a gun!" The hallway erupted. Kids screaming, running, trampling each other. Officer Davis charging forward, Mrs. Patterson trying to shield students with her pregnant body, teachers slamming doors, lockdown alarms blaring. But Gustav just stood there, calm, almost smiling. "You idiot," he said as Officer Davis tackled me to the ground, knee in my spine. "You really thought I'd be stupid enough to act alone?" "Where's the weapon?" Officer Davis had my face pressed to the floor, cuffing me. "Where is it? Check. His bag." I gasped. "Please, check the bag." More officers arrived. They surrounded Gustav, who raised his hands slowly, that smile still on his face. One officer grabbed his backpack, turned it upside down. The contents spilled onto the floor. "Is that a python?" Officer Davis's knee dug into my spine while I watched the python uncoil from Gustav's backpack, its brown and tan scales catching the fluorescent lights as it slithered across the hallway floor. Kids were still screaming and running toward the exits, their backpacks bouncing against their shoulders as they shoved past each other. Gustav just stood there with his hands raised, that weird, calm smile on his face like he'd planned this exact moment. My throat burned worse than anything I'd ever felt, and when I tried to tell Officer Davis about the threats, all that came out was this horrible croaking sound. The other officers surrounded Gustav, hands on their weapons, barking orders at students to get back into classrooms. Mrs. Patterson was pushing freshmen through the nearest doorway, her pregnant belly pressed against the doorframe as she counted heads. She kept glancing back at me on the ground, her face twisted into something I couldn't understand, like she was trying to figure out if I was dangerous or hurt, or both. The lockdown alarm kept blaring, this awful shrieking sound that made my head pound in rhythm with my throat. Every breath I took made this whistling noise through my damaged windpipe, and black spots kept dancing at the edges of my vision. Mrs. Patterson herded the last of the freshmen inside and turned back one more time, her hand pressed against her belly, and I saw her mouth moving but couldn't hear what she was saying over the alarm. Then a teacher grabbed her arm and pulled her into the classroom, and the door slammed shut with a metallic click that somehow cut through all the other noise. Officer Davis finally hauled me to my feet, his grip bruising my upper arm as he marched me to one end of the hallway. Two other officers took Gustav to the opposite end, both of them keeping their distance from the python that was now coiled near a bank of lockers. The pat-down was thorough and rough, hands checking every pocket and seam of my jeans and hoodie. They found my phone, my wallet with my student ID, and $12 and a pack of gum. That was it. I watched them search Gustav across the hallway, pulling out his student ID and a folded piece of paper that one officer unfolded and studied. The officer showed it to his partner, and they both looked at Gustav with these hard expressions I couldn't read from this distance. Through the crowd of officers and administrators rushing into the hallway, I caught Mrs. Patterson's face pressed against the narrow window of the classroom door. Her hand was still on her belly, and she was mouthing something at me. I tried to read her lips, but my vision kept blurring from the pain in my throat. It might have been "stay calm," or maybe "I'm sorry," or possibly something else entirely. Then another teacher appeared behind her and pulled her away from the door, and her face disappeared from the window. The officers walked me down the hallway toward the nurse's office, my feet stumbling over themselves because I couldn't quite catch my breath. An EMT was already there waiting, a woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun who made me sit on the paper-covered exam table. She pressed her fingers against my windpipe, gentle but firm, and I gagged hard enough that tears sprang to my eyes. She told me the swelling was minimal, that I was lucky, that my voice would be strained for a few days, but I'd be fine. She handed me an ice pack wrapped in a thin paper towel, and I pressed it against my throat where it did almost nothing for the burning pain. The school resource officer came in with an assistant principal I recognized but couldn't name, and they both pulled up chairs to face me. They asked why I shouted about a gun when there wasn't one, their voices careful and measured like they were talking to someone unstable. I tried to explain about Gustav's threats, about the anniversary he mentioned, about how he said Mrs. Patterson would get bit if I told anyone. My voice kept cracking and breaking, coming out in these horrible rasps that made the EMT wince. The resource officer and assistant principal exchanged this look, this quick glance that made my stomach drop, because I knew that look. That was the look adults gave each other when they thought a kid was lying or crazy or both. The lockdown finally lifted after 40 minutes that felt like 4 hours, and my phone started buzzing nonstop in the plastic bag where they'd stored my belongings. I could see the screen lighting up over and over through the clear plastic, notification after notification piling up. When they finally gave it back to me, I had 63 messages. Half of them said I brought a weapon to the school and caused a panic over nothing. The other half called me a snitch who got Gustav arrested over a prank with his pet snake. Nobody asked if I was okay or what actually happened or why my throat sounded like I'd been gargling broken glass. My mom's contact photo appeared on my screen, and I tried to answer but only managed this pathetic whisper that she couldn't hear. The nurse took the phone from my shaking hands and explained what happened in this calm, professional voice while I sat there feeling like I was 5 years old again. Mom said she was leaving work right now, that I shouldn't talk to anyone else until she got there, and hearing her voice coming through the speaker made something crack inside my chest. I realized I was scared, actually terrified in a way I hadn't let myself feel while everything was happening. Through the open door, I heard two administrators talking about Gustav in low voices. He was in a separate office down the hall, not arrested yet, just detained while they figured out what to do about the python. One of them kept using the word disruption instead of threat, and the other one mentioned calling the district office about liability. I could tell they wanted to downplay everything, to make it sound like a stupid prank gone wrong instead of what it actually was. Sitting there with the ice pack pressed against my throat, I kept replaying Gustav's words about the anniversary. The way he said it like it explained everything, like I should have known what he was talking about, like it was the most important thing in the world. The certainty in his voice made my skin crawl even now, sitting in the safety of the nurse's office with adults all around me. Because whatever anniversary he meant, whatever he'd been planning, I had a horrible feeling that stopping him in the hallway hadn't actually stopped anything at all. Principal Foster walked into the nurse's office 20 minutes later, wearing her usual gray suit and carrying a leather folder. She pulled up a chair and sat down across from me, her expression serious but not angry. She told me I was suspended pending investigation for causing a panic and making false statements about a weapon. I tried to protest, tried to explain about Gustav's threats and the anniversary, but my voice gave out completely halfway through the first sentence. Nothing came out except this pathetic wheeze that made the EMT look over with concern. Principal Foster said the decision was temporary, until they reviewed all the evidence and interviewed witnesses. She said she understood I thought I was helping, but the school had protocols for these situations, and I'd violated every single one of them. Her folder had papers inside with my name at the top, official forms about student conduct and emergency procedures. She left the folder on the counter and walked out without saying goodbye. The nurse gave me more ice and told me to rest my voice, that forcing it would only make the swelling worse. I sat there holding the ice pack and staring at that folder, feeling like everything was spinning out of control. The lockdown was over, but teachers kept walking past the nurse's office door, glancing in at me with expressions I couldn't read. Some looked worried, some looked angry, and a few just looked tired like they couldn't believe this was happening on a random Tuesday. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway around 3 o'clock, right before the final bell. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond just physical tiredness. Her eyes had this heaviness to them, and she kept touching her belly like she was checking to make sure everything was okay. She came in and sat down next to me, moving slowly because of how pregnant she was. She told me quietly that she was going to write down exactly what she saw and heard this morning. She said she'd include Gustav's behavior, the way he threatened me, the obvious fear on my face when I was trying to signal Officer Davis. Her voice was gentle, but firm when she said she couldn't promise it would change the administration's decision. She said Principal Foster had to follow district policy, and right now the policy said I'd caused a major disruption based on what turned out to be a pet snake. She squeezed my shoulder before she left, and I wanted to thank her, but my throat still wouldn't cooperate. An officer I didn't recognize came to get me at 3:30, saying he'd escort me out through a side entrance to avoid the main hallways. But kids were everywhere because school had just let out, pouring through every exit and filling the parking lot. They all stopped to stare as I walked past with the officer next to me. Someone definitely had their phone out filming. I saw the screen pointed right at me. I heard whispers following us, bits of conversation about the gun that wasn't there. A girl from my English class said something about overreacting, and her friend laughed. Another voice called me paranoid, said kids like me were why schools had to do lockdown drills every month. I wanted to scream that I was trying to save them, that Gustav had threatened Mrs. Patterson, that something bad was supposed to happen today. But my throat wouldn't cooperate, and the officer was moving me along quickly toward the parking lot. Mom's car was waiting by the side entrance, engine running. She got out when she saw me and pulled me into a hug that lasted way too long. The officer talked to her for a minute, handing over some papers about my suspension. Then we were driving home, and Mom wasn't saying anything, just gripping the steering wheel tight. At home, she made me tea with honey and set it on the coffee table. She told me in her no-nonsense voice that we weren't talking to any reporters or posting anything online. She said she'd already called her lawyer friend for advice, and we'd handle this properly through official channels. She set up the couch with pillows and blankets like I was sick, which honestly was how I felt right then. She brought me my phone and my laptop and told me to rest, that we'd figure everything out tomorrow. I sat there sipping the tea and feeling the honey coat my throat. A news alert popped up on my phone saying there was a lockdown at our school, but no weapon was found and no one was injured. I clicked through to read the full article. The comment section was already full of people blaming me for overreacting. Someone said I was paranoid and probably needed therapy. Another comment said kids like me were why schools couldn't be normal anymore, why everyone had to live in fear. A parent wrote that I should be expelled for traumatizing their child. I scrolled through comment after comment, each one worse than the last. Nobody asked what I'd seen or why I reacted that way. Nobody wondered if maybe there was more to the story. I turned my phone off before I could read anymore. Lying on the couch, I forced myself to replay those seconds in the hallway when Gustav's backpack was open. The metal was definitely there, long and dark. Something coiled next to it that I'd assumed was connected to a weapon, but now I was second-guessing everything I saw. The image in my memory felt less clear, more uncertain. Maybe the metal was just the snake's water dish. Maybe the coiled thing was just the python itself. Maybe Gustav had set me up perfectly, knowing exactly how I'd react. I turned my phone back on and opened my messages. I scrolled through Gustav's old group chat from sophomore year, back when we were actually friends who talked about normal stuff like video games and homework. But there were messages from 3 months ago I didn't remember seeing. Stuff about rebalancing ecosystems and making statements that matter, references to forums I'd never heard of. I realized he must have started a separate chat without me, one where he talked about his real plans. I opened a browser and started searching for information about the anniversary he mentioned. A local news article from last year popped up about a massive fish kill in the river that runs through town, thousands of dead fish that nobody could explain. The article was dated exactly 1 year ago tomorrow. My blood went cold as I finally understood what Gustav meant. Tomorrow was the anniversary of whatever killed all those fish. I created a fake account using a random email I'd set up years ago. I searched through Gustav's old posts looking for clues about the forums he mentioned. I found references to an eco-extremist community, some group focused on invasive species and environmental justice. When I tried to join, a message popped up saying I needed to be vetted by someone already in the group. The moderator wanted to know how I heard about them and what my interest was in restoration ecology. I closed the browser, my hands shaking. An email arrived from the school with the subject line disciplinary hearing notification. I opened it and read through the formal language about my suspension and the hearing scheduled in 3 days. I needed to bring a parent or guardian and any evidence I wanted the administration to consider. The words made everything feel more real and more scary. This could actually go on my permanent record. This could mess up college applications. This could follow me forever. The clock on my laptop showed 2:14 a.m. when I heard footsteps on the stairs. I closed the browser tab about eco-terrorism networks, but Mom had already seen the glow from my screen. She sat down on the couch next to me without saying anything for a minute, just looking at all my open tabs and the notes I'd been scribbling. Her face had that expression where I knew she was trying to stay calm, even though she wanted to freak out. She asked what I was doing up so late, and I showed her everything I'd found about invasive species releases and the forums Gustav had been posting in. We talked for almost an hour, and she made me promise I wouldn't try to investigate on my own, or contact Gustav directly. I had to agree that anything I found would go straight to the police, and she'd be involved in any conversations with authorities. It felt like being treated like a little kid, but I understood why she was scared. My phone buzzed with a notification from the fake forum account I'd created. A direct message from someone called Brooks appeared, asking how I heard about the community and what I knew about restoration ecology. The message included a question about whether human intervention in ecosystems was ever justified, and I realized this was a test to see if I was actually one of them, or just some random person who stumbled onto their group. I wrote back carefully, trying to sound like I agreed with their ideas about nature needing to be protected from human damage. My hands were shaking as I typed because I knew this person might be connected to whatever Gustav had planned. I needed to find Gustav's old project proposal that Mrs. Patterson mentioned in the hallway. I dug through my backpack and found my AP bio binder from last semester, flipping through pages of notes and lab reports until I spotted Gustav's handwriting. The proposal was about invasive species in local waterways, but the margins were covered with phrases that made my stomach hurt. He'd written natural balance and human plague and restoration through removal in tiny letters along the edges of every page. The language matched exactly what I was seeing in the forum posts, and I felt sick knowing this had been building in his head for months while I sat next to him in class, completely unaware. Mrs. Patterson had seen these notes when she reviewed his proposal, and she must have thought it was just passionate environmental interest. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was a voicemail from Mrs. Patterson sent to the whole class. Her voice sounded exhausted and careful as she explained that there were some science fair schedule changes and all projects needed final approval before the event. She reminded everyone that she was available if anyone had safety concerns they wanted to discuss privately, and I wondered if she was thinking about Gustav and what almost happened in the hallway. The way she emphasized safety concerns made it seem like she knew something else might be planned. I opened a new document and started writing down everything I knew. Every detail about Gustav's threats in the parking lot, the anniversary he mentioned, the forum connections, the phrases in his old proposal that matched the online posts. I wrote for 2 hours straight, organizing everything into a timeline that connected all the pieces. When I finished, I sent it to the non-emergency police line with my contact information and a note saying this was urgent. I didn't expect anyone to respond right away since it was almost 5 a.m., but my phone rang 2 hours later while I was trying to sleep. Detective Mercier introduced himself and said he'd read my report. His tone made it clear he was skeptical but willing to listen, probably because he had to follow up on any tips about potential threats, even if they came from the kid who shouted about a gun that didn't exist. He asked if I could come to the station tomorrow afternoon with my mom and bring any evidence I had in digital format. I agreed immediately and felt this tiny bit of hope that maybe someone would actually take this seriously. The detective pointed out during our call that I wasn't exactly a reliable witness given what happened at the school. He said it carefully, but I heard what he meant, that my credibility was basically destroyed after causing that panic. But he also said he appreciated me coming forward and that they'd look into the information I provided. We set up the meeting for 3 p.m. the next day, and he told me not to do any more investigating on my own. Another message appeared from Brooks on the forum. He sent me an onboarding document with most of the text blacked out, just enough visible to explain their philosophy about invasive species being justice for environmental destruction. The visible parts talked about humans as the real invasive species, and how introducing other invasive animals was a way to restore balance by showing people the consequences of their actions. I forced myself to respond enthusiastically, saying I understood their mission and wanted to help. Brooks wrote back that I was moved to a probationary tier, where I could see more of their plans, and my stomach dropped because I was actually getting access to whatever they were plotting. I went back to the news article about Gustav's python to see if there were any updates. Someone named Ariel from Animal Control had commented explaining that ball pythons aren't actually invasive in our climate because they can't survive the winters. But she mentioned that Burmese pythons have completely destroyed the Everglades ecosystem in Florida, and that deliberate releases of invasive species are a form of eco-terrorism that can devastate local environments for decades. She wrote about how these releases can cause native species to go extinct and change entire food chains. Reading her comment made Gustav's plan feel even more real and more dangerous, because I understood now that this wasn't just about one snake, it was about deliberately damaging ecosystems as some kind of twisted statement. Mom and I drove to the police station the next afternoon. Detective Mercier met us in the lobby and took us to a small interview room with a table and 4 chairs. He had a notepad and a laptop, and he listened while I walked him through everything I'd found. I showed him the screenshots of forum posts, Gustav's old proposal with the matching language in the margins, and the timeline I'd built connecting everything to tomorrow being the anniversary of the river fish kill. He took notes and asked questions about how I knew Gustav and what exactly he'd said in the parking lot. I explained about the threats and the backpack and how he'd specifically mentioned it had to happen on the anniversary. The detective's expression got more serious as I talked, and I could tell he was starting to believe that this might be real. Then Detective Mercier told us something that made my blood run cold. Gustav had been released to his parents that same morning with no weapons charges, just a citation for bringing an unauthorized animal to the school. The python was with animal control now, and they were trying to figure out where he'd gotten it. Gustav's parents had hired a lawyer who was already arguing that their son was just planning a dramatic science demonstration for his biology class that went wrong when I overreacted. The detective said there wasn't enough evidence to hold Gustav on any serious charges, and the school wanted to handle it as a disciplinary matter rather than a criminal one. I sat there feeling like I'd failed completely because Gustav was free and probably still planning whatever he'd been planning, and nobody seemed to understand how serious this actually was. I spent the rest of that afternoon refreshing the forum every few minutes, watching the private channel where Brooks had just moved me. My hands shook as I held my phone, reading through post after post about restoration, ecology, and ecosystem balance. Then Brooks pinned a new message at the top of the channel. The post talked about bringing gifts to the ecosystem at public water sources and green spaces around town. He used phrases like anniversary actions and natural rebalancing that made my stomach twist. I took screenshots of everything, my fingers fumbling on the screen because I was shaking so hard. I sent all of it to Detective Mercier's email with a message saying I thought something was planned for tomorrow. The detective called me back within 20 minutes. His voice sounded tired but focused when he told me he was assigning me a point of contact at the department. He said not to engage with the forum directly anymore, and definitely don't try to investigate on my own. He explained they were taking my information seriously now, but they needed to build a case properly, which meant slowly and carefully. I wanted to argue that we didn't have time for slow and careful, but my throat still hurt too much to talk for long. I went back to the forum after we hung up and just watched the conversations unfold. People were posting about captive breeding success and spectacular demonstrations. A user with a newer account sent me a direct message hinting at something big planned for the science fair this week. The message mentioned how the school event would be perfect cover for their actions. I felt sick reading it because I suddenly understood they were planning to use the science fair to release more invasive species. I forwarded the message to Detective Mercier immediately. Then I sat on my bed staring at my phone, trying to figure out what else I could do without breaking my promise to the detective. My phone rang, and Mom's voice came through the speaker saying Principal Foster wanted to meet with us tomorrow morning before school. Mom sounded worried but also relieved that the principal was willing to talk before the formal hearing. The next morning we drove to the school early and sat in Principal Foster's office with its diplomas on the wall and motivational posters about leadership. Foster looked more tired than I'd ever seen her, dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept much either. She asked careful questions about what I saw in Gustav's backpack and why I reacted the way I did. I could tell she was worried about liability and lawsuits from how she phrased everything. But there was also real concern in her voice when she asked if I felt safe at the school. I told her about the forum and the planned releases and everything Detective Mercier was investigating. She took notes and said she'd coordinate with the police about security for the science fair. Mom's lawyer friend called that afternoon with news that surprised me. Mrs. Patterson had submitted a written statement to the administration describing everything she witnessed in the hallway. The statement said I tried to de-escalate the situation before shouting, that Gustav had been acting strangely, and that she saw real fear in my face. I felt this complicated mix of gratitude and guilt because Mrs. Patterson was putting herself out there for me when she didn't have to. She was pregnant and dealing with her own stress, and she still took the time to write that statement. Detective Mercier called again that evening to share part of an animal control report. 3 local pet stores had reported missing inventory of reptiles and fish over the past 2 months. The pattern suggested someone with knowledge of invasive species had been systematically acquiring animals that could survive in our local climate. The timeline matched perfectly with Gustav's increased forum activity based on what I'd shown the detective. He said they were tracking down the pet store employees to see if anyone remembered suspicious customers. The next day, Detective Mercier got a warrant for Gustav's laptop. He called to tell me they found bookmarks to the eco-extremist forums and research on local waterways, but there was nothing that explicitly outlined a plan or proved Gustav was going to do something dangerous. Gustav's lawyer was already arguing it was just a kid interested in environmental science doing research for school. I wanted to scream because I knew it was so much more than that. I'd seen Gustav's face in the parking lot and heard his threats and felt his fist in my throat, but none of that proved he was planning eco-terrorism. I opened my messages and typed out a text to Gustav from my real account. I kept my tone neutral, just asking if we could talk about what happened. The message showed as read within minutes, but he never responded. His silence felt more threatening than any words could be because it meant he was still out there planning something, and I couldn't reach him. That night I checked the forum again and found a new post from Brooks. He was praising non-hero members who understand that drawing attention is part of the strategy. The post specifically mentioned decoys and misdirection and how chaos creates opportunities for real action. I sat there reading it over and over, feeling this sinking sensation in my stomach. My hallway panic might have been exactly what they wanted. Gustav, with his python, was the decoy that got everyone looking in the wrong direction, while other members positioned themselves elsewhere. I'd stopped Gustav, but I might have actually helped their plan succeed by creating the perfect distraction. I sat there staring at my laptop screen until the words blurred together. Mom knocked softly on my door around 9 that night. She came in carrying 2 mugs of tea, even though I never drank tea. She set one on my desk and sat on the edge of my bed with the other. She asked if I wanted to talk about what happened. I shook my head, but she stayed anyway. She told me gently that maybe I should talk to someone professional about everything, a counselor or therapist who could help me process it all. I was too tired to argue or explain that talking wouldn't fix the fact that I'd been used. I just said okay. She looked surprised but relieved. She pulled out her phone right there and made an appointment for tomorrow morning before school. I could tell she was scared I'd change my mind if she waited. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with a call from Detective Mercier. He sounded rushed and alert in a way that made my chest tight. Someone had called in an anonymous tip about suspicious activity near Miller Pond. A person seen carrying containers toward the water right at dawn. The detective was deploying patrol units to watch the area. He told me to stay home and stay safe. I spent the whole morning refreshing news sites and checking my phone every 30 seconds. Mom had to leave for work, but she kept texting me asking if I was okay. I lied and said yes. The call came just before noon. Detective Mercier's voice was tense but satisfied. Officers had arrived at Miller Pond just as someone was dumping containers into the water. They'd stopped most of the release, but not all of it. Some fish had already made it into the pond before the officers could intervene. They'd caught a 19-year-old with dozens of tilapia fingerlings. The detective said biologists were being called in to assess how many fish got into the pond ecosystem and what kind of damage they might cause. I asked if the person they caught was connected to Gustav. The detective said they were still questioning him, but his phone had messages from the same forum I'd been tracking. I turned on the local news at 1 and watched them cover the pond incident. The reporter stood by the water talking about copycat behavior inspired by recent school disruptions. She mentioned the python at the school and said troubled teens were now mimicking dangerous pranks. Gustav's name didn't appear anywhere in the coverage. The reporter called it isolated incidents by attention-seeking kids. I felt this sharp frustration in my throat because they were completely missing the point. This wasn't copycat behavior. This was organized and planned and connected. The news made it sound like random stupid kids instead of what it actually was. I opened my laptop and started cross-referencing forum post timestamps with school club rosters and social media profiles. 2 usernames posted regularly during times that matched our school's lunch periods. Their writing style sounded young and used slang that older members didn't use. One of them had posted a photo of their science project last month, and I could see our school's hallway in the background. I built a list of possible suspects with screenshots and evidence. I sent everything to Detective Mercier with a note explaining my reasoning. He responded 20 minutes later saying his team would look into it. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Patterson. Her message was careful and measured. She said if I noticed anything concerning at the school or at the science fair, I should tell her privately before taking any action. She asked me to trust her and the administration to handle things safely. The text felt like both an olive branch and a warning. I appreciated that she was trying to keep me safe while also trusting me enough to reach out. I texted back saying I understood and thanked her. Detective Mercier called again that afternoon. Ariel from Animal Control had messaged him about a report of unlicensed snail shipments to a local address. She'd flagged it because apple snails are highly invasive and illegal in our state. The address connected to a college student who'd been active in environmental activism groups. The detective said they were getting a warrant to search the address. This was the first real lead connecting multiple people in the same network. I asked if I could help somehow. He told me firmly to let the professionals handle it and focus on the school. The counseling session happened the next morning in a small office near the main building. The counselor was younger than I expected, with an easy smile that made me less nervous. It was awkward at first because I didn't know what to say, but she asked good questions that made me actually think instead of just giving automatic answers. I ended up talking about feeling responsible for things I couldn't control, about feeling guilty for things that weren't really my fault. She helped me identify which parts were mine to carry and which parts I needed to let go. She gave me strategies for staying involved without drowning in worry and fear. I left feeling lighter but also more aware of how heavy everything had been. That night I checked the forum on my fake account. Brooks had posted a new announcement. The main stage event was happening at the science fair tomorrow. A quiet river gift would follow. The post was vague enough to avoid being an explicit threat, but clear enough that I knew exactly what was planned. My hands shook as I took screenshots. I forwarded everything to Detective Mercier and Principal Foster with a detailed message requesting discreet security at the science fair. I explained what I thought the coded language meant. I begged them to take it seriously. Detective Mercier called me back within 10 minutes saying they were coordinating with school security and local police. Principal Foster sent an email saying she'd received my message and appropriate precautions were being taken. I stayed up until midnight refreshing the forum, watching for any new posts or changes to the plan. I opened a new email and started typing everything I could think of, where the booths would be set up, which exhibits used language from the forum, what times Brooks had posted about the main stage event and the river gift. Detective Mercier needed to know about the local ecosystems booth specifically, because that phrase appeared in 3 different forum posts this week. I wrote about the cooler they'd probably use and how apple snails could survive in containers for hours. Mom appeared behind me with tea and read over my shoulder. She didn't say anything for a while, just stood there reading as I typed. When I finished, she reached past me and added a paragraph at the bottom saying she trusted my judgment, but wanted adult supervision at every step. She said I was a minor who'd already been hurt once, and she needed assurances that professionals would handle the actual intervention. We sent it together at 11:47 p.m. Mom squeezed my shoulder and told me to get some sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling until almost 2 in the morning. Science fair morning felt wrong from the start. Security guards stood at every entrance with tables set up for bag checks. Kids were complaining loudly about being treated like criminals. Someone's mom was arguing with a guard about whether her Tupperware of cookies needed to be opened and inspected. I spotted Mrs. Patterson near the main entrance looking pale and stressed. She kept checking her phone and scanning the crowd. Her hand rested on her belly like she was protecting the baby from something. I could tell someone had briefed her on the potential threat, even though she couldn't say anything publicly. The whole scene felt too normal and too tense at the same time. I walked through the exhibits trying to look casual. The gym was packed with poster boards and models and kids explaining their projects to judges. Everything seemed fine until I reached the local ecosystems booth in the far corner. A small cooler sat on the table next to a poster about native species balance. The language made my heart start racing. Restoring natural balance, correcting human interference, ecosystem justice. Those exact phrases appeared in Brooks's forum posts. I forced myself to stay calm and not stare. Detective Mercier was somewhere in the crowd dressed as a parent volunteer. I scanned the gym until I spotted him near the chemistry exhibits wearing a visitor badge and holding a camera like he was documenting his kid's project. I caught his eye and tilted my head slightly toward the local ecosystems booth. The detective moved through the crowd casually. He stopped at a few exhibits on the way like he was genuinely interested. When he reached the booth, he smiled at the student manning it and asked what the project was about. The kid started explaining something about invasive species impact. Detective Mercier nodded along and then gestured at the cooler. The student's body language changed immediately. He got defensive and tried to redirect to the poster. The detective asked politely if he could see inside the cooler. The kid hesitated too long. Detective Mercier's smile stayed in place, but his voice got firmer. The student finally opened the cooler. Inside were 6 plastic containers with water and what looked like large snails. Detective Mercier identified them as apple snails based on Ariel's briefing. He quietly told the student to step away from the table and called for backup on a radio he pulled from his jacket. The fire alarm started blaring before backup arrived. The main auditorium alarm was the loudest, and it triggered the whole building. Suddenly, hundreds of students and parents were flowing toward the exits. Teachers were trying to maintain order, but everyone was pushing and shoving. This was exactly the kind of chaos that would provide perfect cover for someone to slip out with contraband. I scanned the crowd frantically. Most people were moving toward the main exits in a steady flow. But near the side exit, I spotted an older teen I didn't recognize. He was standing still with a backpack, watching and waiting instead of evacuating. Everyone else was rushing past him, but he just stood there. I pushed through the crowd toward Detective Mercier and pointed at the teen. The detective immediately started moving in that direction. Uniformed officers appeared from somewhere and began directing the crowd more forcefully. The teen with the backpack saw the officers and tried to blend into the flow of people heading outside. An officer intercepted him right at the door and asked to check his bag. The teen tried to refuse, but the officer wasn't asking. He opened the backpack and I could see plastic containers inside. Water sloshed in them. Small fish were swimming in circles. The officer called for more backup and pulled the teen aside. Detective Mercier's radio crackled. I was close enough to hear him answer. Officers at the river had caught someone attempting to release containers of fish into the water. They'd arrived just in time to stop most of it, but some fish had made it into the river before they could intervene. Biologists were being called to assess the damage. The detective's jaw clenched. He spoke into the radio confirming the science fair intercepts and requesting a full sweep of the area. The evacuation turned into controlled chaos. Officers were trying to identify anyone else who might be involved. The crowd pressed tighter as people tried to get outside. Someone shoved me hard from behind. I stumbled forward and my throat injury flared up with sharp pain. I couldn't breathe right. Black spots appeared in my vision. Mrs. Patterson materialized next to me. She used her pregnant body to shield a freshman who was about to get trampled. Her other hand steadied me. She guided both of us toward a less crowded area near the wall. The pain in my throat was making my eyes water. Mrs. Patterson stayed with us until the crowd thinned. Detective Mercier found me once things calmed down. He pulled me aside near the emptying gym. The older teen volunteer was actually a local pet store employee. He'd been linked to the missing inventory that Ariel had flagged. They were tracing his connections now. One name kept appearing in multiple places. Brooks Meeks, a college dropout who'd been running the eco-extremist forum from his apartment. The detective said they were getting warrants and coordinating with other agencies. This was bigger than just our town. Back at the station for debriefing, Principal Foster sat across from me and Mom in a small conference room. She acknowledged that my tip had prevented a much worse situation. Multiple release attempts had been stopped. The science fair had been evacuated safely. But my suspension still stood pending the formal hearing. Her voice was kind but firm. She said she was trying to balance doing right by me with following district policy. The school board needed to review everything. Even though I'd helped prevent an attack, I'd also caused a panic and violated multiple school policies. I understood what she meant, even if it felt unfair. Mom squeezed my hand under the table. Detective Mercier found us in the hallway after the meeting and said they arrested the pet store employee an hour ago. The guy was charged with conspiracy, theft of inventory, and attempted environmental damage. But Brooks Meeks was still out there somewhere, hiding behind his online username and encrypted messages. The detective explained that building a case against someone who operates mostly online takes forever. They needed warrants and cooperation from tech companies and evidence that would hold up in court. I wanted immediate justice, but I had to accept that wasn't how this worked. Mom drove me home in silence, both of us too tired to talk about what came next. My phone buzzed around 9 that night with a voicemail from Mrs. de Patterson. Her voice sounded warm but exhausted, like she'd been dealing with scared students all day. She thanked me for speaking up even when it was hard and scary. She said she needed to focus on helping her students process everything that happened, so she was going to step back from my situation. But she wanted me to know she believed me and she was grateful. I listened to the message 3 times, feeling this weird mix of relief and abandonment, even though I knew she was doing the right thing. My phone buzzed again 20 minutes later with a text from Gustav, just one line that made my stomach twist. It wasn't supposed to go like this. I stared at those 6 words for what felt like forever, trying to figure out what he meant and how I should respond. Part of me wanted to yell at him about how he almost destroyed everything. Part of me felt this deep sadness for the friendship we used to have before he got pulled into something dark and twisted. I typed and deleted 5 different responses before finally putting my phone down without sending anything. What could I even say that would matter now? 3 days later, Mom and I sat in Principal Foster's office for my disciplinary hearing. The room felt too formal with its big desk and uncomfortable chairs. Principal Foster had a folder in front of her with Mrs. Patterson's statement, the detective's report, and documentation about the prevented releases at the science fair. She went through everything carefully, asking me questions about my intentions and my actions. She acknowledged that I'd been trying to protect people, but she also pointed out that I'd violated multiple school policies and caused a panic that could have resulted in injuries. Her final decision was probation instead of suspension. I'd have mandatory counseling sessions twice a week and community service helping with river cleanup and invasive species education. It felt fair even though the community service part made me nervous. Detective Mercier called the next day with an update that made everything feel bigger and more serious. Multiple agencies were now involved in tracking down Brooks Meeks and other forum members. The FBI had joined because the conspiracy crossed state lines. Other towns were reporting similar attempted releases, all coordinated through the same online network. The case was expanding way beyond our school and our river. The detective thanked me for my persistence and said something that stuck with me. Without my initial report, they wouldn't have known to look for the larger pattern. They would have treated each incident as separate vandalism instead of organized eco-terrorism. 2 weeks after the science fair, I started my community service at the farmer's market. Ariel from Animal Control ran an invasive species education booth there every Saturday. She had posters showing different problem species and tanks with examples of fish and plants that didn't belong in our local ecosystem. She taught me how to identify apple snails and Asian carp and water hyacinth. We answered questions from people who wanted to know what they could do to help. It felt good to turn all my anxious research into something actually useful instead of just scary. Ariel was patient when I messed up species names, and she shared stories about her work that made me realize how much damage invasive species actually cause. One morning a few weeks into my probation, I passed Mrs. Patterson in the hallway near the science wing. We both stopped walking, and there was this awkward pause where neither of us knew what to say. Then she gave me a small nod and a genuine smile. No big speech about forgiveness or dramatic moment of reconciliation. Just a quiet understanding between 2 people who'd both done their best in a situation that had no good options. She kept walking toward her classroom, and I kept walking toward mine, and somehow that felt like enough. Around the same time, I heard through friends that Gustav got charged with conspiracy and reckless endangerment. More evidence had connected him to the planned releases and his coordination with other forum members. His parents pulled him out of school for homeschooling. Someone said he was in therapy now, and his lawyer was trying to argue he'd been manipulated by older members of the forum. That might be partially true. Maybe Brooks Meeks and the others had taken advantage of Gustav's environmental concerns and twisted them into something dangerous. But Gustav had still made choices, still brought that python to the school, still threatened people. During one of my river cleanup shifts, Detective Mercier asked me to write everything down in a first-person account for his case file. Not because he wanted me to get recognition or redemption, but because accurate records mattered for prosecution. I sat on the riverbank during my break and wrote out the whole story from that morning in the parking lot to the science fair evacuation. The water flowed past looking completely ordinary and peaceful. You'd never know that someone had tried to dump invasive fish in there, or that a whole network of people had been planning to damage ecosystems as some twisted form of environmental statement. I thought about how much danger hides beneath surfaces that seem calm, how you can't always tell what's lurking under the water until it's too late. And that's it for today's story. Thanks for spending a few minutes here. You honestly make this feel like more than just a video. I hope it gave you something warm to take with you today. Subscribe and come back whenever you need a little calm.